We're doing interviews for the Grand Lodge of North Carolina's Living History Project. And we're here with Most Worshipful Billy Dill. Tell me where you grew up.
I grew up in a historic little town called New Bern, the first colonial capital in North Carolina. Quaint little place, wasn't very big then as it is now. Grew up, I had a unique childhood being a twin. Some people say we're identical, but I don't necessarily think we are. But we had a good childhood growing up in a loving home.
Did you go to school in New Bern?
Went through school, graduated from New Bern High School, and then went to East Carolina University.
And what did you do for a living?
I was an educator, started out teaching drafting and quickly moved into administration. Served as a high school principal for a number of years. Then I went to work in the superintendent's office as a director of vocational and technical education, and went back my last 3 years as a middle school principal.
Do you have any children?
I have 3 sons. The youngest one is a Mason. The other 2 are not. They each very different and have their own interests and backgrounds and things. I have 4 wonderful, awesome grandchildren. The oldest is a boy, 17. He's got a sister, 14, and then we skip to a 6-year-old grandson and a 3-year-old granddaughter.
What made you become a Freemason?
When I had first gotten out of college, I lived in Greenville for about a year, and I had got into the JCs and things, and it just didn't fulfill me like I thought I could have been. And then we moved to Goldsboro, where I was teaching drafting, and didn't really get involved with much. I had some friends, and back then, to get a teaching job, you had to pretty much agree to coach. And so I was coaching, and that's what took up my interest. And then after my father died, Margaret and I and about a 10-month-old baby moved back to New Bern, and I had just been out in the neighborhood one day and walked across the street to see a lady that I used to cut her grass growing up, and I didn't know anything about the Masons. I knew that her husband had been something important in Masonry. I had a grandfather that died when I was about 7, and I'd heard stories about him as a Shriner. And but never really thought much about Masonry. And I walked across the street, and I was talking to, I called her Miss Anna, and I said, Miss Anna, tell me about this fraternity known as Freemasons. And I know Mr. Ben had been real big in it, and she said, Lord, she says, the men don't talk to the women about Freemasonry. That's all secretive. She said, well, you've got a friend, Shorty Kafer, was a very good friend of your father's, and he past Grand Master. He said he'd love to talk to you about it. And I didn't know anything. So I called him and told him what I wanted to come talk to him and everything. Didn't even tell him what I wanted to come for. And we set it up for a couple of days later, and I went around there, and he had finished up cleaning up his kitchen and everything, and we sat down in his family room, and he said, okay, what you want to talk about? I said, I want to talk about this Freemasonry, this fraternity thing that you were very embedded in. And he said, okay, what you want to know? I looked at him with my little grin, and I said, I want to know about all the secret stuff. And he sat there kind of just stern and looked at me for a minute or two, and he finally turned and he said, you see my Holy Bible on the coffee table? And I said, yes. He said, if you will study that Bible every day, if you'll go from cover to cover and embrace what's in those pages, you will possess the secrets of Freemasonry. He said, now we have ritual and we code it, and people think that's the secrets. He said, the true secrets are there for anybody. He said, it's right there in that book. And he offered me a petition, and he told me which lodges met in New Bern and when they met. And he said, you don't have to join my lodge. You can go to any lodge you want to. He said, but here's a roster from his lodge, which was St. John's number 3. And he said, you don't have to do it now, maybe in the next day or two. Just go down the list. If you open this little roster book, the little pamphlet was folded up. He said, you open it up, all the members are there. And he said, you probably know just about everybody that's in there. Well, I had no clue. I didn't know who Masons were and who weren't. Mm-hmm. And of course, I had come back on the New Bern High School staff, and I'd probably been there 6 weeks when I talked to him. And so I go home that night, and of course I opened it up right then and I go to look, and 7 of the men on the faculty at New Bern High School were all members of St. John's Lodge. About half of them were past masters. The rest of the group, just about, probably 90%, those were the men that in my church and community and businesses and I looked up to and respected growing up. So I ended up filling out the petition and giving it back to him. And St. John's met on Wednesday nights. And being an Episcopalian, we didn't do a lot of church on Wednesday nights. But being a school personnel, we had ball games on the nights that the other lodges all around met. And I wasn't going to join something if I couldn't participate. So I had to go a route, and that was the easiest one for me to go to.
How many years ago did you join?
I was raised September 23rd, 1981. I know, before most Masons today were born. The one thing that has always stuck out with me in my Masonic journey, I think it's important that when you sign somebody's petition, you should go and pick them up and take them to the meeting. I was just told where to go and when to be there. And it was in the Scottish Rite Temple. And so I go in, and he said, just come in through the big brass doors on the front. Nobody told me the magnitude of the alarm on that door, because the women that worked in the Scottish Rite office, they were blind for people coming around from one side and could enter the building. So they put this massive horn system on it. So I walk in and I've got to go to the 3rd floor, and I cross that LED beam and I almost went to the 3rd floor without the elevator. Then the rest of it was just going in. Back then, I never saw the lodge room or anything. We were kept out in what we called Lothrop Hall, which was the dining room, until we went to the preparation room. And all Masons know where it goes from there.
Are you part of more than one lodge?
Yes, I am past master of St. John's, but I moved my membership to Ionic 583, which was my grandfather's lodge. It's a rural country lodge. I'm also a past master there. I'm a member of Crown Point 708, the charter member of Ionic Lodge in Code City 583, and a charter member of Knights of Solomon 764, and I am a member of Knights of Solomon 766.
Have you ever been a certified lecturer or a coach?
I used to do a lot of coaching in St. John's Lodge when I was a member there. I am a certified lecturer, 30-some years. I served in 2001 as the Grand Lecturer of the Grand Lodge.
What other dependent bodies are you a part of?
I am a member of the Goldsboro York Rite, which I'm very active in. I'm a member of the New Bern York Rite, which I participate in their festivals, but they meet the same night as my Blue Lodge meets, so I go to Blue Lodge. I am a member of Sudan Temple Shriners. Through the Scottish Rite, I joined the Royal Order of Scotland, so I'm a member of that. But the thing that I think I'm most interested in now at this stage of my Masonic life are the bodies that are by invitation to join, the ones that are based more on esoteric research, presenting papers, the things that challenge you and bring more light in terms of what was alluded to maybe in the 3 degrees of the Blue Lodge, and then somewhat answered in the York Rite, more so than the Scottish Rite, but then heavily explained and called to your attention in these other bodies like the Red Cross of Constantine, Operatives, Athelstan, Pilgrims Preceptors, Rosicrucians, and the list goes as far as you want to be involved. You can get just as heavy as you want to.
Tell us about some of your experiences being Grand Master of North Carolina.
The year I was Grand Master.
Mm-hmm.
It's a funny little thing. About 5 years after I was Grand Master, somebody came up to me, I don't remember who it was, but they asked me a question that stuck with me. They said, what was it really like being Grand Master? And I don't know, I didn't even think, I just said, it was a lot like being a middle school principal. The children are just a lot older. And that may seem funny, but as we get into this, everybody seems to have their special area that they like, or they think that it needs to be this way, or this is their interpretation, and they stick to it. I mean, they'll stand you that this is what it is. I was fortunate; I did not have to deal with a lot of negative, punitive kind of things. I had vowed that I would serve the Masons of North Carolina, and I spent most of my time in the state of North Carolina, going to Blue Lodges and things. It was funny. Walt Clapp, the Grand Secretary, told me at one point, he said, "You need to take about a week, maybe 2 weeks off." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You're going to burn yourself out." And I said, "Well, 365 days, that's all I've got. I can do this." Because if somebody called and said, "Can you come do a 50-year presentation?" You know, if I didn't already have something scheduled, I went. A lot of late nights on the road by yourself. But for 365 days, if the Masons of North Carolina thought enough to elect me Grand Master, then I should show that same respect back to them and help them as much as I could anywhere. You know, I went to Salisbury and stirred the Brunswick stew pots. You know, I went to Ham Day. I went to, back then we had St. John's Day at Oxford instead of the way it is now through a homecoming thing. It was a more formal church service kind of St. John's Day. And that, and of course you've got all your board meetings and committee meetings of the Grand Lodge and stuff.
How has Freemasonry impacted your life?
You know, I can't say enough that, you know, you hear people say, you know, I can never give back a fraction of what Freemasonry has given me. And I know everybody would probably sit there and say that what I'm going to tell you is not true. My mother said I could talk to a telephone pole. People don't realize really how shy and bashful most of us are going in to Masonry. Masonry brings you out of the shell. When you start becoming certified, you start doing ritual work, or you're the chaplain and you're going to the altar and you're praying and you're doing it from memory and stuff. Those are the things that turn you into the person that you are. They give you the confidence to get up in front of a group. You know, we go from when you first enter the lodge and they're going to take a vote, you sometimes look around the room like, okay, how's everybody voting? And it's like your hand's tied to a string and it goes up. But the more involved you are in Masonry, the more you become to be your individual person. And you have the confidence that you've gained to say what you think and to stand up for what you believe in. So it helps you in that. And can't say enough for the friendships and the people. The people are the most important part. You hear people talk about, we've got to save all these old lodge buildings. You know, we can't. This is where I was initiated, passed, and raised. We've got to have fundraisers to save them. I'm a little on the other end of the spectrum. I see the buildings as brick and mortar. I see the fraternity, the men in the fraternity, and the relationships that you build with those people and how they interact in your life and you interact in their lives. I just, you know, the people that I've met, I would have never met if it had not been for Masonry. And I've just met all over the world some of the most wonderful men, and I've been treated, you know, like royalty, open arms, brotherly love, friendship, fellowship. It's just, you can't really describe it. You have to live it.
Talk a little bit more about friendships that you've made.
Well, like I said, I came home in 1980, and that list of rostered members of St. John's Lodge, I knew them all. And it was people I looked up to. And I had that relationship that you respect your elders, you know, and you do right towards your elders and stuff. But to be brought in as one of the group, and you know, and you have that. I was in my early 20s, I guess, or late 20s, 26, I think. And you go to a meeting, and this 68-year-old man puts his arm around your shoulder, and he said, you know, I've been doing all the third-degree lectures in this lodge for the last several decades. It would be an honor. You don't have to answer tonight, but it'd be an honor if you'd let me teach you the third-degree lecture. And he said, just think about it, and if you think you might want to do it, just call me sometime and we'll talk about it. And so to be brought in to that kind of fellowship and friendships that I've made. You know, I met a fellow, and he wasn't even in my lodge, but he was the director of the stage crew. And something happened, and we just crossed paths in a Scottish Rite reunion, and he asked me to work on the stage crew. And by the time I was Grand Master at my installation, he was probably about 91 years old, and he was there. He wouldn't miss it. So I called, as soon as they installed me, and I sat down, and of course Jerry Tillett was my installing officer. He gave me the gavel, my insignia. And you're supposed to, as soon as you sit down, you're supposed to give it back. And I wouldn't give it back to him. I said, before I give this back to you, I wrapped up the installing marshal. And I said, I want you to go find worshipful brother Charles F. Dickinson Sr. and bring him to the East. And I had him sit in a place of honor with me for the rest of the installation. I owed him that. He was like another grandfather to me. And so it's just that development. And it was the people in New Bern that I knew. A lot of them I went through school with their children and stuff. But it was like I'm still at their children's position, and they're the adults and the parents and whatnot. But all of a sudden, you're brought into the fold, and you're one of them. And that's the way they treat you. I had men coming to me asking my opinion on things, and it was wonderful. Grand Master calls you at home, and you're 1989. I'm the master of the lodge, and the Grand Master calls to get my thoughts and advice on something. It's that kind of a friendship, a trust, just a love for your fellow man. Jack Edwards was a past master of Dorrit Lodge. I had grown up with his oldest daughter, so I had known him pretty much my whole life. Jack was assigned for me to get certified the first time. And I had always called Jack and said, can you help me on this part of the ritual or that part of the ritual, or explain to me why we do this in the lodge this way. And I think I went to Jack because he and I, even though I had known him growing up, I had joined the chef crew at Sudan Temple. And so Jack and I just bonded. And we started kind of cooking pigs on the side together, barbecuing and those kinds of things. And he would borrow some of my cooking stuff. I'd borrow some of his. If I got in a bind, he might cook a pig for me to serve at a party or something and help out. And so I was using him, and I asked him one day, I said, Jack, what would it take to get you to sign my application to become certified? He said, you come over to the house and recite the whole book. And I said, the whole book? He said, well, you don't know which part they might ask you in the examinations. You got to know it, the whole thing. So we started, and we just Monday night, Tuesday night, we at the same time. And finally, one night, he said, okay, give me the slip. I'll sign your application for that. We continued on to be great friends. And I think we thought the same way. We had the same love for Masonry. We had the same respect for the fraternity, the dignity of the fraternity and our fellow brothers in the fraternity. And that's not always true in what we've got even today. We're nothing more than a reflection of society anyway. And so you see how things change. I mean, I remember when I first joined St. John's, if you were a member, you didn't attend the lodge unless you were in a coat and tie. You didn't come in tennis shoes or shorts or t-shirts or golf shirts or anything like that, bibbed overalls. Now, there were lodges that the men would come maybe in jeans and a shirt, but that's the same thing they wore to their church, where they were farmers or that kind of thing. And that's fine. I'm not saying everybody ought to have to come in a coat and tie. But I was raised in a very strict lodge as a Mason. If you were an officer, you sat up straight and both feet were on the floor. You did not cross your legs at all during that whole evening's meeting or degree or anything else. You wore a coat and tie. In fact, real quick, I remember it was July. I was the junior deacon, and we had just declared the lodge open, and all the power in that end of town went out. Well, St. John's was so old, the windows had been painted so many times you couldn't open the window, so we're sitting under a heat box in the middle of July, burning up. The perspirations were running all down your back and everything. And I remember the master sending the stewards out to get candles because he didn't know we were going to have the meeting. And somebody said, we're going to meet. And they said, well, this is the way they originally met in this lodge room. And so they went and got the candles. And about 15 minutes later, the master kind of rapped. He said, brethren, I'm sorry, but everybody in here has my permission to take off your suit jackets if you wish to. That's the way that I was brought up. And that's why, sometimes I get in lodge and I have to really bite my tongue, because I want to help these young people carry on those traditions. And a lot of those things are going by the wayside. I talked to a secretary of a lodge in Greenville today. He had texted me, and I apologize for not getting back sooner with him. I said, but I knew you were going to be up here at Grand York, right? And you asked me a question I wanted to discuss face to face. And he wanted to know, a lodge had told him, and it happened to be St. John's, that all the officers and what they had to do in degree work was laid out in the OSW. Well, that wasn't exactly true. The master's parts, the senior, junior awards, those would speak in parts and degrees. Is the only one that really is laid out as something extra that would be outside the duties of your office is the senior deacon. And it says the senior deacon delivers the lecture when you're doing the second degree. And a lot of lodges don't follow that. It's just somebody that knows it and everything. But I was trying to explain to him that that's in St. John's, they see that as code, because that is a lodge tradition. Every officer from the Tyler through the master has certain expectations. Very few lodges require the chaplain to do all the prayers. So that's 6 prayers in 3 lodges. To do the installation prayer, you're only going to do it one time, and you do it the night you're installed chaplain. That's the only time you do it. The graveside prayer in the second section of the Master Mason's degree, and the first degree charge. That's his job. The stewards, the junior steward gets the second degree charge, and the senior steward gets the third degree charge. It's all things to prepare. It's also for an opportunity for the membership to make up their minds of 2 things. Does he have the ability to do it, and does he have the willingness to do it? And Masonry's a funny thing. I taught in Wilkerson College, and I did planning, and I always asked the very first class I taught in, I taught in the 3 classes each, but the very first question I asked them were, what kind of master do you want to be remembered as? And they said, oh, good ritualists. We put on good degrees. And I said, that's wonderful. I said, but let's think about it. You may know the ritual frontwards, backwards, inside out, right side up, all upside down. You may know that, but you don't get a single candidate your year. Now what kind of master were you? I said, certainly the ritual is important, and we need to do it the best, because we're impressing the candidate or candidates with their degrees. But it's more important that you are a leader, that you're respected, and you can lead a group of men in a positive direction for the betterment of mankind.
If you had the opportunity to talk to young Billy before he became a Mason about Masonry, what would you tell him?
Young Billy. My youngest son is a Mason, and he's a past master. I've taught all my sons. My middle son, when I talked to him, we were talking about it, and he asked me about it, and I said, well, I can tell you some stuff and whatnot. If you want to join, I'll help you. And he said, I've watched you, and he was younger when I went through the Grand Line and everything. He said, Dad, I'm not mature enough to do what I've seen you do. And I said, you're more mature than I was when I was doing it. But he saw it as a big challenge. Now, the youngest one, he's past master of his lodge. And he called me, and he said, I think I want to join the lodge. And I said, do you know which one? He said, Crown Point, because he still lives in Greenville. And we talked about it, and I said, I'll help you any way I can. And that was the extent of it. I never tried to get them to follow in my footsteps. I didn't ever try to say, you have to join, or I want you to join, or anything. I encouraged them, and I told them I'd help them any way I could, as I would anybody. I give them the same advice and direction and help that I would give anybody that came to me and said, what can I do to become a Mason?
I want to thank you for your time, and I'm humbled that we do this first.
Anytime. Glad to do it.